Hi everyone and welcome to another video. So today we're going to build a production ready static website on AWS step by step. So we'll store our site files in an S3 bucket, which will be the origin for CloudFront, and connect everything to our custom domain using Route 53. So I'll also show you how to set up SSL for HTTPS, which will provide security, and then we'll configure the origin access so your bucket stays private. And at the end we'll also test the DNS, so the domain resolves globally, and by the end you'll have your own website live on AWS. So the first part of this mini project is going to be checking that you've got a registered domain, or if you don't have one, then you can just go ahead and create one. So I've already got one, which you can check by coming to Route 53 in registered domains, and this is what I'll be using. If you don't have one, you can click on register domains. You can search for a domain name. I'm just going to search for awstestproject.com, and there's an exact match available, and it also shows you what the cost is. So just bear in mind this is a one-off cost, so it will be added to your next monthly bill. That's $15 for the whole year. So you can proceed to checkout. Going to turn auto renew off. And when you click next, it's going to take you through to the second section, which is entering your contact information. Once you've done that and you click next, it will take you through to just review it, and then you submit. So once you've done that, if you come back to Route 53, it will take around 20 minutes for the domain to become live, and you'll see this. So you'll see a registered domain with whatever you've chosen. The other thing it will do is it will create you a hosted zone. So if you come to hosted zone, you'll see the name you created, and you also see it's created two records for you. So if you go into the hosted zone, you'll see that it's created an NS record and an SOA record. So we don't need to know about what these are for this mini project, but just to confirm, that's what it should look like. Now that we have our domain, we're going to create our S3 bucket and upload our HTML code. So if you come to S3, which you can do by searching in the search bar, and click Create Bucket. Now this bit's really important. If you get this bit wrong, then the project won't work properly. So you have to name your S3 bucket exactly what your domain name is. So just to avoid any mistakes, I'd recommend coming back to Route 53 and just copying the domain name. Add that as your name. Leave block public access on. The idea is we want to protect the S3 bucket by keeping it completely anonymous from the public and only access it through CloudFront. So I'm going to come down to default encryption. We're going to disable for now. I will do a future video on KMS encryption within S3, but for now we're going to disable and create bucket. So now you'll see it's created the bucket. That should be quite quick. So if you click on your bucket, and now we need to upload our files. So I will leave a link to a GitHub repo, and that will contain the HTML code. What you'll need to do is put that into another program like Word or Visual Studio Code, and just make sure that's saved as HTML. So just save it to your computer. So now we're going to go to Add Files, and we're just going to upload the HTML file. So once that's done, we can close. Yep, close. And now you'll see we've got the index.html file. So there is one important thing just to double check with this. So if you click on the index.html, and if you just come down to metadata, just double check that where you've got the key content type is just showing as text/HTML. If it isn't, it may be that it's been saved into the wrong format, and it will affect the outcome of the project. So now we're going to create our CloudFront distribution. So let's search for CloudFront in the search bar. And once you're into the CloudFront, we can click Create Distribution. So let's give it a name. I'm just going to call it the same as my domain name for consistency. So awsinanutshell.com. Going to select single website or app for distribution type. Going to search the domain you registered in the previous step. And then you should get this message that domain managed by Route 53. Okay, so on to next, we're going to specify origin. So that's going to be S3, of course. You're going to browse S3 and select your S3 bucket. Again, it needs to be the same as your domain name. So once that's done, so this is part of the new console. So we're definitely going to allow private bucket access to CloudFront because this is going to create the bucket policy for us, which we'll show in the next section. And we're going to leave everything else as default, come to enable security. So in this project, we're not going to enable a WAF, so we'll click do not enable security protections and then click next. And this is a new feature in the console. So this is actually going to create the TLS certificate that CloudFront requires for us. So we can go ahead and we're going to tick the create a wildcard certificate and then click create certificate. So it's then going to show us all the steps it's taken to create the certificate for us. And that should only take a few more seconds. Just taking a bit longer. And now we can see a certificate has been created successfully. So we can carry on, look at review and create. Just review these sections. So just recapping what we've selected. And we can submit. Okay, so it's created our distribution for us. This is going to take a few minutes to deploy. So you can see the last modified is deploying. And then when you go back into your distribution, the last modified will show, once it's completed, it will show the date and time that it's done. So we'll just wait for that to finish. Before we go any further, we're just going to go back into our CloudFront distribution, and then we're going to come back into settings and click edit. And then we're just going to scroll down to where you've got default root object, and you're just going to enter index.html. That's just going to make sure CloudFront can find the index.html file when it looks up the content to display. So then we're going to review what else the creating the distribution did for us. So if we go back to our domain name in hosted zones, you can see it's created the CNAME record for us automatically. And then if we go to S3 and come back to your S3 bucket, you'll be able to see that it's created the bucket policy for us, and it's also automatically added the CloudFront distribution ID. So without this, if this was blank, it would mean that the CloudFront wouldn't have access to actually fetch the content. And the final step for this project, we're going to come back to our hosted zones in Route 53, click on your hosted zone, and we're going to create an A record. So we'll create a record. We'll leave the record name blank, and the record type is going to be A, so it routes traffic to an IPv4 address as well as other AWS resources. I'm going to toggle alias and select alias to CloudFront distribution. And then, of course, we're going to select our CloudFront distribution. So what we're basically doing here is creating an A record that's going to configure so that when someone puts AWS in a nutshell into a browser, it's going to route to the CloudFront distribution, which is then going to fetch the data from the S3 bucket. So we can submit that. And this is going to take about 60 seconds to take effect. So what we're going to then do is paste our website name into a new browser, and that should bring up our content. But as I say, this does take a little while just to go live. Once that's completed, all we're going to do is take our domain name and we're going to paste this into a new browser tab. And this is what you should see. So just to summarize what we've done, so we've created an S3 bucket, we've uploaded an index.html file which contains the information to display this landing page. We've then created a CloudFront distribution and used Route 53 to configure a domain name to route to the CloudFront distribution, which is then fetching this data from S3. Now, hopefully you can see this. If you can't, we will just go through a couple of troubleshooting steps, because even though this is a fairly straightforward project, things can quite easily go wrong. So if we come across to our S3 bucket, if you've had any issues, go to your index.html file and just scroll down to metadata and just check the value here is text/HTML. And then if we go back into our main bucket, just check the permissions and just check that the bucket policy has been automatically updated, and also the CloudFront distribution is actually got the same name as the one you've created. And finally, if we just come back to our CloudFront distribution and just check in settings that the default root object is index.html. So if you've done those things, it should work well. If not, just make those changes and you should see our landing page. So if you've made it this far into the video, thanks for watching. So the last thing we're going to do is just terminate resources so you don't get charged. So we're going to come back to Route 53 and go into our hosted zone, and we're going to delete the A record and the CNAME record. So I'm going to leave everything else in place for future videos, but you can delete it if you want to. So delete the CNAME record. Successful. Then I'm going to come into our CloudFront distribution. So just going to go to the main screen, highlight, and then disable. So once you've disabled, it's going to take a few minutes for it to be completely disabled. So you'll see the deploying sign again. And then once you've refreshed a few times, you'll be able to see highlight it again and see the delete option. And the final thing we're going to do is go back into S3. Going to find our S3 bucket, highlight the index.html file, going to click delete. And then we're just going to copy and paste permanently delete in there. Once that's done, you'll see it's successful. So you can close and go back into bucket and highlight, and then going to delete your bucket. So again, we'll just need to go through permanent delete. And that completes the tutorial. Thanks so much for watching. I hope it's been useful, and I'll see you in the next video.